Hi, everyone. I'm so glad that you could join our vulnerability talk today on voice vulnerabilities. I think you'll appreciate today's talk as it revolves around having hope, holding on to hope through mental health struggles and just the problems and hardships we're currently facing. And I'll be talking about this with a very special friend of mine. Actually, I've been wanting him to be on this podcast since day one of starting it, and I'm so glad that he's finally on it. So hi, Craig. Could you shortly introduce yourself to the listeners?
Absolutely. And Sinju, I likewise was thrilled and excited and couldn't wait to have this conversation with you. Uh, and I just love that this podcast is happening. And I remember sitting in like my kitchen, even talking and dreaming about like what that next year was going to look like for you. And I can't express how thrilled it's been to watch kind of that come to fruition and your own excitement and growth in this. But my name is Craig Randall. I'm an English teacher and like literature teacher. Struggled with anxiety and depression for really as long as I can remember. And but I didn't really know what that meant or what it was for the longest time. So it was interesting. I can only say that it's as long as I can remember looking back, because for most of my life, I probably would not have identified that way in any way, shape, or form. But it was interesting that the path to healing really didn't start until that identification. And then it's just been a journey ever since with the ups and downs and whatnot. But I guess the short end of it too would be um, I had a pretty big crash when I was about 28, 29, 35 now, right after our second child was born. And then was on medication for a while after that, which really, really helped. But then and then there's so much more to some of that. But then I tried to go off my medication when everything was going really well about a year and a half ago. And it just didn't quite work as planned.
Mm,
And kind of the mind resplit in all those ways and
mm,
kind of re-brought up all those traumas. So the last year and a half has really just been trying to climb out of that. Um, and it's been a really amazing, difficult, rich, horrible, and wonderful journey all at once.
mhm. Yeah, and honestly, you're probably one of the most hopeful people that I've met who've been struggling through like mental health struggles, and um, as I mean, that's exactly why you're here, right? To talk about the healing process and how you can hold on to that hope, right? But before we talk about that, I wanted to just like have a segue to today's topic. But could you maybe tell us like what are some memories you have of your childhood and how it was like for you?
Oh yeah, and I was thinking a lot about this with the questions you sent over because it is interesting. If you would have asked me 5 years ago about my childhood, I think I would have painted it in a completely negative light.
Mhm,
Um, and now when I look back, I think, yeah, there's huge pieces of negativity in it, but I also, I think, see the light and positivity and hope in it now too. And it's funny, the longer I go through healing, the more I realize it wasn't all bad. There was just a lot of bad things that kind of blocked out the good,
mhm,
which, and then we get to choose which one to look at. I think it's unhealthy to only focus on the bad just as much as it is unhealthy to ignore the bad and only focus on the good. Um, but I think I had, for the most part, aside from kind of some of the traumatic consistencies, a very, very, I look back and I see a lot of joy, and I see similar, like in my current life, I see, I have these fond memories of opening presents on Christmas and birthdays and running around the neighborhood with friends and running around. I think the difference is the whole of my childhood was punctuated by this kind of tension between being free and like an agent in my own life versus being controlled, whether that's directly by other people or by my perception of what other people wanted.
mm,
And that might be parents, it might be adults, even friends, right? My dad had a very specific picture of what I was to be, right? Which I think a lot of parents do. And I love him to death. And I think he and I've had some great conversations about this since. But like in our house, you played sports. That's what boys did. That's what you do. I was always a kid that really liked literature and stories and toys and music. I never liked sports. I didn't really enjoy them. I um, but I did them because that's what needed to happen in order to get the affirmation that the human desires, right? We want to be seen, we want to be known. So it's interesting how I can trace back so much of my own struggles simply to the fact that for the first 19 years of my life, I wasn't actually being me. I wasn't really being true to myself. The older I've got, the closer I've been able to do that. But most of my childhood, even though it was filled with laughter and movies and play, but it was also filled with me trying to work my tail off to prove myself at things that I had no heart in, that I didn't care about whatsoever. Um, and then when you didn't do well at something, right? If I went to a baseball game and didn't do well, that was kind of this shame brought onto
Mm-hmm.
that. And then
Yeah.
here you are, then not doing well at something that you don't care about, and you're being shamed for it. It's I mean, not any one single event might be traumatic, but to
Mm-hmm.
live in that kind of imprisonment
Mm-hmm.
for
For
nearly
years,
19
yeah.
for years.
Mm-hmm.
And it made sense that when I got to high school and all of a sudden, you could be more, you could leave the house more, and you could go out with your friends, and opportunities would arise for little rebellions. And I went pretty wild. uh, but that's happened. That's people rubber band like that.
Yeah.
Took me a long time, and
Mm-hmm.
it's part of it's coping, right? You're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know I could live this way or do this.
Mm-hmm.
But then, if it's not kept in check, any coping mechanism can turn negative, even good ones. So, but a lot of it, I think, comes down to that how free I felt versus how controlled by others. I still don't like being controlled. It still thematically comes up at work sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where if I'm told I have to do something, my knee-jerk reaction is to burn it down and be like, no, even if it's the right thing to do, which I have to check. But then just, I think that basic idea of who I actually am versus who I'm supposed to be or who others expect me to be. Um, and I think most of the healing has come along that line, that
Mm-hmm.
idea of finally being able to confront and shed the thoughts of who people want me to be and becoming comfortable and confident in my own skin. And then being able to set up boundaries for other people
Mm-hmm.
to make sure that they know this is who I am. And if they try to, the funniest part is when we engage with people from our past lives, right? But they interact with us how they did. But
Mm-hmm.
if I'm not that person anymore, do I just
Mm-hmm.
cave and become that for them, or do I hold
Oh
strong and
yeah,
respect
true.
them?
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting thing. And living here in the Netherlands for 3 years, and because of COVID, we haven't gone to go home. We're still trying to go home this summer, but it's interesting that any anxiety I feel about going home is about that. It's completely surrounded by, I'm going to go back and I'm not the same person these people knew.
Mm-hmm.
And is it going to be easier for me to hold true to that, or just
Mm-hmm.
the temptation of faking it
Mm, yeah,
as to not create conflict?
right. Because it could be like a trigger.
Very much so.
Mm-hmm.
And the question, I think the right thing to do is just to hold true and be yourself, but that can be hard.
Yeah, with all the
But I
pressure
think,
and yeah.
yeah, absolutely. But I think that's that connective piece, though. Like, that's where it started.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been to therapists and different psychologists and read every book I can. So it's neat to be able to, I feel like part of the reason for the peace and the healing I've found is because I've been able to name that so much. And I've been able to fend through and understand that there were specific events and memories that I could go off about childhood and remember where a specific wound was, or at a certain moment in time with a friend or my parents or this person or that person or myself. But I've found that the more I hold on to those moments and memories, the more I create animosity towards the people in them, instead of capturing the big picture. Like, they were just a piece of the puzzle. I think it's nice too, though. I feel lucky that, I think every parent wounds their child in some way, right? And they create some sort of pain.
Mhm.
I watch myself actively and indirectly, even though I don't want to, kind of creating these wounds in my own children
Mhm.
because it's just what we do. Hope that as they grow older, I can explain that to them and
Mhm.
apologize, forgive
Mhm.
me, which I think is something that doesn't happen with our generations as much.
Mhm.
Whereas I tried to confront my parents about, hey, when I was a kid, this really hurt.
Mhm.
And they're not used to that. So they kind of, those conversations didn't always go well.
Mhm.
And
I
it took
mean,
you.
yeah. Yeah, so like you said that in the past, bringing those things up would just create more animosity. But
Mm-hmm.
then how would you change your mindset? Like, where does it start? Don't you have to like revisit the past or kind of come to an agreement with it that this is what happened and um, I'm going to leave it at this? What was the way that you could change your mindset about viewing it? Like, how did you heal yourself through it? And yeah, despite the
Great
past.
question. Yeah, I think um, to a certain degree, and this is a hard answer, but to a certain degree, it eventually becomes a choice. Like I think for if I look at the moment, I distinctly remember like reading a book and looking at a definition and going to my wife and saying, I think I'm depressed and struggle massively with this thing they call anxiety. It was the first time that I ever spoke the label out. From that moment on, I think
Mhm.
my healing journey began.
Mhm.
And the more I learned, the more I researched, the more I even went to therapy, the more I started uncovering the past. It wasn't like all of a sudden in that moment I was able to articulate what I understand about my past as I did right now. That took like 8 years to be able to articulate that and realize that it came down to that tension between who I actually was versus who others expected me to be. And that's just, I think, my main thread.
Mhm.
But for the first 6 years of that journey, as I uncovered things, every one of them led to anger. Every one of them led to, I would get bitter. Oh yeah, and this happened, and then this happened. I
Mhm.
remember when that happened. And I think the knee-jerk human reaction is to be frustrated, to be angry, and to a certain degree, we have a certain right to be. Like if a certain unfairness is consistently being done to you throughout your life, right? Um, and if the people that we live with and are around or have issues, and their generation was never told to deal with them. You know what I mean? Our parents' generations, our grandparents' generations, they didn't know what we know now. They didn't have the opportunity. Mental health was not talked about. It's still a taboo subject, right? In
Mhm.
so many cultures and in so many homes. It's what I loved about your post yesterday here on voice vulnerabilities, right? About like, and then me, it was interesting. Me as a white man, I wanted to share it for you, right? It's interesting, a white man being like, "Hey, check this out," because it's a great way of how window into what mental health conversations look like in Asian cultures. And
Mhm.
I just, as a white man anymore, I think I don't know. I feel like I have to toe whatever line softly, but nonetheless, I remember for years I was just angry because it became clear what happened. But then at a certain amount of time, I remember coming to a conclusion, and this was with a therapist. I remember she just kind of looked at me, and we'd been meeting for like 6 months, and she asked me the most loving point blank question ever, which was, "I get the anger, and I get that, but right now it's just eating you away. What are you going to do with it?" And it was like, oh, and that is what shifted me into thinking more of, here I was healing, revealing all the things that had happened, but I was still not being the active agent in my own life. I was still not the person in the driver's seat. I was still being controlled by the past, by the
Mhm.
history, the
Mhm.
emotions, specifically the emotions. I needed to come to a place where I could actually inflict, which is maybe a weird word, my own say and choice and actions. It's like the victim versus the passive versus active living,
Mm-hmm.
really. And so often people who have experienced such traumas they are victims. So they become that victim, and then we kind of lose our power, right? We
Mm-hmm.
lose our strength. And because that situation kind of teaches us that we don't have it and we don't deserve it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that's where the last couple of years have been specifically different. I've learned a lot of skills and read a lot of books and talked to a couple psychologists, and had some really incredible experiences learning to take that power back and take
Mm-hmm.
that control back, and realize that I think that's where the hope came from. Some of my friends called me annoyingly hopeful and positive. They're like, you were so positive, it's annoying, and I almost don't want to be annoying. And I was like, well, I'm going to keep doing it. That helps me. And even though you're annoyed, it's helping you. But the idea that we can actually change it, we can change our mindset, we can change the way we think. Writing was one of the biggest vehicles for that. I started writing my novel, which will come out this spring. And the novel is this kind of crazy, kind of paranormal horror story. But the whole thing is really just it's the metaphor of my own journey. Here we have this character who grew up in this abusive home, which is not as, when people read this book, my fear is that people are going to see Charlie's parents and be like, wow, Craig's parents were like that. They're not. No, they, the novel is an extreme version of, but the theme of my story is very much kind of at the heart of this, where for most of the book, the character believes that he's taking control of his own life, but he doesn't realize he's being manipulated. And then the end of book one experiences this brand new horrendous trauma within the story.
Mm-hmm.
And then the whole driving force of the story, though, is this person wondering if they can heal from that, if they can ever actually come back.
Yeah.
He's wondering, like I was in those horrible places, wondering, is it possible for, I mean, the entirety of, I'm in the middle of writing the final part of the story right now. And here we are at the end of the story, and the main character, Charlie, is still just in this back and forth, not believing at moments, sometimes believing that they can become that active, engaging person.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the thing about healing, right? It's changing the narrative that you've had for so long after countless amounts of wounds or traumatic experiences. And the way that you said it, those traumatic experiences kind of lead you to believe that you are the victim and the environment is out there to control you or out there to get you. People are out there to put you down.
Yeah.
And once you have that narrative, everything else, you look at the world through those lens. And
totally. After forever and forever and forever, and that's the only thing you know, then it makes sense that someone would get trapped in that. Because oftentimes in those situations, I think any person that is experiencing depression to a certain degree, I feel like it just means they've lived in one situation long enough. They don't see hope outside of it anymore.
Yeah.
And I think the big push, and even in my writing and push for hope is I think it's just to remind people that it is there. Even if we can, I mean, intellectually, when I wasn't feeling when my mind crashed again, I didn't feel it at all for months and months and months, but I had felt it, and I knew intellectually that I had, and then it would come back.
But how do you, when you're in such a mindset, such a negative mindset, and feel like there's nothing you can do about it, where does this hope come up from? How do you act on it when you're having days when you can't feel like you can, get out of bed, and when you feel like everything's terrible around you? Like, how do you get yourself to, because I think that's a lot of things that people are struggling with, right? They have the knowledge, they know what it has to be, but they're such in a helpless, hopeless situation, or at least they feel like it, and they don't feel like they can act on the hope because they can't see
it. Absolutely. And like the definition of hope is really interesting, because it's about having faith in the unseen. Hope literally means to assume something that you can't see will be there. And I feel like words like hope, those classic big positive words, hope, dreams, love, I feel like they've been watered down. The more I wrote about hope, the more you'd see it. It seems like something that my grandmother would embroider onto a pillow that I would there throw off the couch, right? And part of the last year, a couple of years for me, I almost felt like I had this responsibility to win back the idea of what hope was for myself and for others, and bring it back to that nitty gritty. Like hope is most powerful when you need it the most. When I look back, I see hope the most clearly when I didn't feel it. It's that flickering match in the dark, right? And it's
Mhm.
that, and I think it goes back to me. It goes back to I had the benefit this experience of not feeling it for a lot of my life, right? But then, and I spent a good 10 years, even before I think I realized I was depressed, just trying to feel better, and doing all these things and acting in ways I still felt pain. And so I operated, maybe my healing journey started even earlier than I expect or than I thought, where I was actively trying to heal from that pain and to get rid of it. But nothing ever worked. Like nothing I ever did ever worked. But I kept going because I knew other people around me don't feel like I do. So I thought I could get there too.
Mm.
I'd watched other people who'd experienced what I was experiencing change. So there was this intellectual understanding, I
Mhm.
guess.
Yeah.
Others have experienced this, therefore I can too.
Mhm.
Um, and it was just kind of a promise that I held to. And then once I went on medication, and then literally 2 days later, I woke up and it was just night and day. It was the clearest transformation I've ever experienced in my life. And
Mhm.
that's where, and I didn't try medication for the longest time. For whatever reason, I thought I had to like be strong and do it on my own, which is really stupid in hindsight. And I apologize if anyone's feeling that. Like, I don't think you're stupid, but that was how
Yeah.
I just remember I would, in hindsight, I should have gone back 10 years before. I should have got on medication and
Mm.
probably would have saved myself from so much pain.
Mhm.
But my own pride that kept me away. But after things went better, I remember waking up and thinking, like, asking my wife, "Is this how you feel, like, regularly?" She's like, "Yeah." And I was like, "What?" I had no idea. I was like,
Mm.
that was the first time in my conscious life that I sat there without just the weight of immense worry on my shoulders. It was I mean, I cried for joy for months just because I
Wow.
was like, I don't feel this weight and pressure. I don't feel like I'm
Mhm.
constantly about to fall apart. I don't feel like I'm constantly needing to juggle 1,000 things. My mind worked faster. I was able to accomplish so much more. Work became easier. Um, so when the mind crashed again, when I tried to go off the meds, it sucked. I very much, like you said, I was in that probably even darker place than I was before. I think the difference being I had felt what I knew existed so recently. No matter how horrible I felt, there was always this intellectual understanding that because I'd felt it once, it will come back, and I will fight as hard as I can to get it back.
Mhm.
Um, I think part of that conviction came with my children too, though. Like, I don't think the reason that the catalyst for me even looking into how I felt and realizing I was depressed and anxious before came from having my children. Um, I don't, even after like getting married to Whitney, I would feel the ups and downs and whatever, and we would just learn to kind of navigate it and kind of skate around it. And I could fake it well enough around other people. It was fine. But it was having kids. It was having those dependents, right? Those people that kids are wonderful, terrifying little mirrors of us. And as I was watching them grow a little bit older and not display the behaviors that I would have wished for them, they were displaying the behaviors of me. And that's when it really cracked me. And I was like, I
Mhm.
need change and I don't know how. And
Mhm.
that's where I went. And I think similarly, when my mind slipped again, I was watching the impact that it had on my children.
Mm.
My doctor was actually she said she's Dutch and she's amazing. And they're very direct people, the Dutch, which I absolutely love. I don't think she used the words disappointed,
Mhm.
especially when I was in a fragile mental state, but she was bummed that I didn't give the non-medication a longer shot. As soon as I
Mm.
crashed, as soon as
Mhm.
I was in this shaky spot again, I watched my children's experiences in life just shift right back really
Mhm.
negatively.
Mhm.
And she's like, in 6 months, you probably could have been operating without the medication. And I was like, yeah. And in 6 months, how much trauma would I have been creating for my children? So me, I
Mhm.
made a conscious choice to go back on the medication
Yeah.
because life is functional, it's fine, and they recovered a lot faster. Just because I don't want them to look back on their childhood like I look back on mine.
Definitely. Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think, and this is the hard part though, right? Because I think there is an intellectual reality that hope is there for all of us, and that life, as we navigate it, can heal, and that things can become better and will become better. And when we don't feel it, I think the important piece there was surrounding ourselves with all the reminders we can,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
When I don't feel it, my wife is there to constantly remind me,
Mm.
it's there, you're strong, you're
Mhm.
amazing. My
Mhm.
children, bless them. When I was crumbling, falling apart, I would be
Mm.
in the on the like the living. There was a couple times last fall where I was literally just shaking on the living room floor, just piles of tears,
Mhm.
because I felt so terrible.
Mhm.
And my 6-year old would come up to me and just hug me, and in
Mhm.
tears himself be like, "Daddy, you are so strong. I love you so much. You're gonna be okay." He was just mimic. You literally just mimic the same things my wife would say because
Wow.
they're little mirrors, right?
Oh.
And so I think, yeah, it was terrible, not fun to go through. I wish he didn't have to go through that.
Mhm.
I think it's building in him an empathy and understanding too.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah,
But yeah,
there's,
having that anchor, as you said, is so important. For you,
yeah,
it was, you know, getting on the meds and tasting what it feels like to be
yeah,
normal and
yeah,
knowing that you don't have to always feel this way. And for others, it
exactly.
might be that they had it taken away. Maybe they had it in childhood. They were
Yeah,
living normally and happily, but something happened and they crashed. But
totally.
they always have this knowledge that, hey, I know that in the past I felt better, and this is not the only way to feel in life. And I think
Hmm.
you're so right when you say you need that reminder that it's not going to always be that way, or it doesn't have to be that way, because you have experience, you have tasted what it feels like to not
Right.
be drained by it.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
how strong are those lies, right? When you are feeling
Mhm.
it, even when you
Mhm.
just wake up not sleeping well the night before, that creeping lie of I'm tired. And then that lie is I'm always going to feel this way,
Yeah.
which is not true at all, right?
Mhm.
You're going to sleep well the next night and be fine, but then that lie creeps in. And then
Yeah.
if you get depressed, you're
Mhm.
always going to, and then your lens, now I have to go to work feeling depressed. Now I have to do this feeling depressed. Now I have to engage with these people feeling depressed. And it just builds and builds. And it's like, that's where retraining your brain to think, where you're like, nope, stop.
Mhm.
That's a lie.
Mhm.
My favorite little exercise that I do, there's a German doctor, a neurologist, that talks about, they literally have done like physiological studies where when you have a thought, like if the
Mhm.
thought exists in
Mhm.
this part of your mind,
Mhm.
it actually cannot exist on the other part of your brain. It
Okay.
physically can't. Where the synapses fire, like they're
Uh-huh.
located. So when I catch myself thinking I'm always going to feel this way,
Mhm.
and I know that's not true
Mhm.
intellectually,
Mhm.
I imagine that thought turning into like a ball of light,
Mhm.
and it's like I can see it in my brain. Like
Mhm.
and then the way that the guy directs it, he's like, ultimately, you need to remember you're in control. So take that
Mhm.
thought and just move it to the left side of your brain,
Uh-huh.
and imagine that thought of you not being able to ever not feel that way again. And then once you have it, just slingshot it, fire it across your head to the other side of your brain.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Something incredible happens. You watch this little blue ball of light go, and then as soon as it hits the center of your brain, it just
Mhm.
explodes and disappears.
Wow.
I
Uh-huh.
literally feel the weight lift from my shoulders in those moments.
Yeah. Okay, so for those of you who can't see, he's basically saying that the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, like, they don't really know what each other is doing because of the synapses and everything. But if you imagine all that feeling in the left hemisphere and imagine it as like a blue ball or like a light, right? A ball of light.
Mhm.
And just like sling it across your right hemisphere and it disappearing.
It just
Um,
fades.
it fades. And I think that's a great way to conceptualize it and just like visualize your feeling and be
Mm.
able to observe it as a bystander. And I think that's a really important thing is to not identify with it. So like if you're feeling
Yeah,
depressed, if you're feeling anxious, I'm depressed, I'm anxious. That's what we
yeah,
feel like. And that becomes the narrative, right? I'm going to constantly
exactly.
be depressed. But if you put it like that as a conceptualization and distance yourself, it
Mhm.
becomes a thing that isn't in you. And I think
Exactly.
I
At
think
the moment,
yeah,
I feel depressed, but it will pass.
exactly. Yeah. So it
Yeah,
just becomes a feeling, but it's something that will pass and it's not in you. It's not in the
totally.
core of you. Yeah.
Yeah, because I feel, again, better right now this last month than I have since before COVID,
Mhm.
but that doesn't mean like, you're feeling better too, but that doesn't mean we're not susceptible, right?
Yeah.
Like, I still, for whatever reason, slept poorly on Thursday night,
Mhm.
or Wednesday night, had a busy day at work Thursday, and I sat there for an extra hour Thursday, Wednesday night, thinking, I'm tired. Oh no, tomorrow's going to be really hard. And it's like, wait, no, Craig, stop. Shoot it from the brain. Eventually fell asleep.
Mhm.
Thursday was still really hard, but it worked.
Mhm. Mhm.
All those thoughts on Thursday night were just firing in all sort of different directions that were hard to control. All
Uh-huh.
sorts of lies came in.
Uh-huh.
And I've learned that when I can voice them to my wife's like, "Are you okay?" And it's like, "No, I keep thinking this and this and this and this." And then as soon as I say them out loud, I realize how ridiculous they are.
Mhm.
And now she just smiles at me, and I'm like, "Oh yeah." And then she's like, "You're gonna sleep fine tonight and feel better." And I woke up Friday morning feeling incredible. So,
Yeah, I also had that experience because you said, yeah, we're definitely susceptible even though we're doing better, even though we're recovering. Obviously, like, you know, there are triggers. And
yeah,
so for those of you who don't know, like I struggle with like eating disorders. And there's a thing where if you go to like the clothing store, it's really hard to like try on clothes and everything because you can see like how your body looks, and that's like a
oh
very big trigger.
yeah,
So yeah, I had that trigger in me and I was feeling terrible after that and just like
mm,
all these eating disorder thoughts coming in. But I did like the same thing of like saying out my feeling and seeing where it's coming from. And then once I said it out loud, once I got like a clear picture of what that feeling was, labeling
yeah.
that, like it was so empowering to just see, hey, this is not me. This is just a feeling. And like I felt better after
Oh,
that. Yeah. So
that's
I also,
amazing.
yeah, I had that experience. But
That's amazing. Well, and I wanted to go back. I wanted to ask you a question, Sinju. I wanted to go
uh-huh.
back, um, as we were talking about. I think there's that, intellectually knowing, like when you can't feel the hope at all, and you think back to, uh, you know, what you have experienced or what works, and then try to project that it will come again. But the idea that it's easier, it's hard to do alone, right? And you almost need that. Uh, I call it my safety blanket, right? The people, the safety net. And I couldn't help but, even as I was telling that story, and then you asked the follow up question, to think that, even just your journey this year, like, I remember when you were not sure about moving back from
Yeah.
the Netherlands, right? But
Yeah.
then I look at where you're at now, right? And you did go back. You went back to a safe spot, right? And I mean, would you say that even the way I told my story, that there was similar threads in your own?
Um, I would definitely say so, yeah. Like having that safety blanket, right? For you was
Yeah,
like your wife and your
yeah,
children kind of mirroring it. I guess for me it was, yeah, just having a safe space because like I was in a place of such big trauma, or at least Amsterdam was a place of trauma for me. And
yeah, yeah.
just the thought that I had this safety to go back to my mom, especially. Like my mom was
Right.
my safety blanket.
Mm-hmm.
She just said, I don't care about your academics. Like, I care about
Mm,
your health, your mental health. And that was very empowering. And um,
right.
yeah, it really helped me to kind of yeah, it was like the push of like, hey, there's gonna be someone helping me through
Yeah.
this, who's gonna be there
Someone
for me,
trust.
reminding me, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and whenever I have those feelings, I also like talk it out with my mom, and
Hmm.
it helps. It helps to say it out loud. It helps to share it, and
Yeah. Those
yeah,
safe places and people. We need those people, right, to remind us who we are when we forget. Not if we forget, but when we forget,
exactly.
because it's gonna happen again.
It is. Yeah, you have to fend for yourself. You have to be ready.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what one of the things I love about teaching too is just simply I've never really looked at my profession as like, yeah, I get to teach kids how to read and write. I look at it more of I get to spend my life pointing out to kids and students who they are, like who they actually and already are, not who they're going to be. They're not going to be these deep thinkers. They already are. They're capable. They're brilliant. So I always kick myself sometimes where I get giddy when I realize that my profession is literally just to kind of help kids unlock the wonderful people they already are
Mm-hmm.
and what they're capable. I've also found that approaching it that way helps them with their academics a lot more too.
Yeah, I mean, being self-esteem, right? That's a foundational thing for all things in life, such as how
Mhm.
mental health, good mental health is foundation for good performance or good social life or anything.
Yeah,
And you're right, like tackling it from the roots of it is so
that I did.
important that I feel like so many adults, but also like people who struggle with it and also people my age tend to overlook. You know, they just kind of try
Hmm.
to solve things by only solving the symptoms, but never really
Oh yeah,
digging into where is this coming from. Um,
right.
so
I think
it's
that's I
yeah.
yeah. That's why I was so inspired by. I've told you this before, but I mean, my wife and I are both like. Uh, I was jealous actually when you were moving home. I was like, I just want to take a year off from work. I just I was jealous for that time. I was so pumped for you personally.
Mm,
Yeah. I think that's where I keep pinching myself too, though, because in the Netherlands, because of the workers' rights, right? Because of the way that the systems are set up, and because of the fact that the medical system is not for profit, because of the fact that things are actually in place, and schools work by, and workplaces work by kind of the letter of the law, and that people do come first. I was able to not take a whole year off, but we were able to, as a team, create a situation where I could thrive again.
mm-hmm.
Um, which, I mean, as soon as that, the nice thing is the healing really felt like as soon as that time was carved out and as soon as that team kind of decided the plan and then we pulled the trigger, as soon as that moment where we said, okay, let's do this, I felt the weight lift. I was like, okay, there's actually space to breathe now. There was safety in certain places. So,
Right. Yeah. This just shows that rest is so important to start the healing process because, you know, when you're mentally struggling, it's so hard. Like, even just the smallest things in life can trigger you and make your mood terrible. And it's those stressors that you really need to remove, and
right.
then you'll have the space to actually breathe and then also work on your mental health eventually. Like,
Yeah.
if I did not take the step to rest, and if
Oh,
I still had academics and everything which was already weighing down so much on top of
mm-hmm,
all of the simple things that I was still struggling with, I
mm-hmm.
wouldn't have been able to come to this point.
No,
So
especially this
rest,
quickly.
yeah, exactly. So rest is, I think, a must for
Absolutely.
the healing process. And, you know, a lot of people are scared that, you know, what if I graduate later than my friends? Or what if I miss out on this opportunity? What if
Yeah.
people judge me and say
Uh
um,
huh.
that I'm being like, that I'm not giving to the community as much as the other people? People, you're scared of how they might judge you, but
Right.
at the
But I
end of
remember,
it, uh-huh.
I remember even talking to you at our kitchen table, right? And I think you were, I knew, and I think Whitney and I were just playfully being devil's advocates in general. But I remember you articulating that But if I leave now and don't go, you know what I mean? It was that social academic pressure, that cultural
Right.
pressure. Like,
Right.
what are people going to say? And
Yeah.
it's funny because I could sit there so easily on the other side of the table from you and be like, who cares what they say? But like the night before, as I was going through my own stuff, I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, what are people going to think though if I do this? And then my wife's
Mhm.
like, what does it matter? I was like, yeah,
Yeah. Why does it matter if it's for your
why?
mental health and your happiness and your well-being? It's so worth it. And like life is not there for you to catch up with other people, like with the society's pace, or life is
Mm-mm,
life's pace is different for everyone. Like
mm,
each and everyone's, the way it works out, the way the times when we have crisis is, it hits differently for everyone. And it's just,
oh yeah.
I think it just, there's no like a measuring stick to what is
Mm-mm.
like the standard pace that you should be going on. And the best thing for you is to just focus on what you need in order
Right.
to recover, as much as you can, and have
Mm-hmm.
better experiences, and eventually be able to do the stuff that you're passionate about.
Right.
Yeah.
How what a wonderful world it would become if maybe the post COVID world was what if our measuring stick became like, hey, how healthy do you feel?
Oh.
How hopeful do you feel? You
Ah,
know, oh,
yeah.
I'm not feeling very hopeful right now. You probably need to go take some time and rest. What if that became
Mm,
the cultural
that would
norm?
be amazing. I
You know.
do, since you said